News presentation.
And you're watching Interface here on SABC 3. Welcome to it. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Magele. The Railway Safety Regulator has just released its latest report. It's called the State of Safety Report, and it's for the 2015-2016 financial year. It comes as train accidents seem to be on the increase. According to the report, the death toll due to security features and security cases on trains went up from 12 in the 2014-15 financial year to 14 in the current financial year. The regulator has a vision of achieving zero occurrences by the year 2020. But how are they going to do this? Well, they're here and we're going to be asking them. We're now joined by the CEO of the Railway Safety Regulator, Mr. Nkululeko Boya. And if you would like to take part in the discussion, you can do so by finding us on Facebook at Interface on SABC or on Twitter at Interface on SABC or at Tembisa Magele. And let me just say this. I know we've been asked before, this is a recorded show, so how can we interact with you? We can, because from the end of the week before we are live on Sunday, we do load the questions that we are asking you, and you can participate throughout the weekend, and we will read whatever we can live on the show. So thank you so much for taking part in that way. Let's welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us here on Interface.
Thank you for having me.
So 10 years on, the Railway Safety Regulator has been monitoring safety across the railway lines. What is your impression of where we are when it comes to safety? Are you getting a sense that things are getting better over time, or is this really still a serious issue that is not getting better?
We are getting a sense as the Railway Safety Regulator that there is improvement within the system. You can see that from our 5 areas of focus, which is the people strike by trains, level crossings, derailments, platform train interface, and collisions. 3 of those categories, even in this particular year, have gone down. And they have been consistently going down over the past 6 years. Yes, we do acknowledge that the people strike by trains is a stubborn category. Because it involves a lot more stakeholders. It's outside of the responsibility of operators. It falls into the responsibility of municipalities, and therefore it needs a lot more collaboration to be able to get that particular category down. But we believe we can work on it.
Yes. I want us to touch on the areas that still need improvement, but you mentioned that there are those that are getting better. Let's look at what's working there. So you mentioned level crossings.
Level crossings, we've got issues of collisions and mainline derailments. Now, if you look at it over the trend over the last 6 years, you can see that those categories are going down consistently year on year in a trend basis. Now, one of the reasons why we're doing that is because we have started to be a lot more stricter as a regulator towards compliance by our operators. Operators are supposed to make sure that they make a submission to the regulator on an annual basis of a safety management system report. One of the things we have changed, we have then said permits will be issued annually. Before, they used to be every 5 years or 6 years. We have changed that to an annual submissions of permit. Now,
so
one of the
what
things...
does that mean? Because if I would, as an operator, get my permit every 5 years, it means anything wrong that happens in that 5 years, you as a regulator can't hold me to account for it?
Yeah, we can, but the strongest tool that the regulator has is to withhold the permit. So if you have a permit for 5 years, technically we then need to revoke the permit, and removing or revoking a permit is a process on its own in terms of our act. But to issue it for a year and then have the authority to not issue it for next year makes the operators comply within a particular period of their permit, which is the annual, and then they're able to complete some of the conditions of permit that we have placed as a regulator, and it makes things a lot easier as we move forward.
The operators couldn't have been too happy with that decision.
Yeah, definitely, but the power gives, the Act gives the powers to the regulator to determine the validity of a permit. And also we do acknowledge that an annual permit, from where we're sitting with the maturity levels that we have in South Africa at the moment with our system, we believe is the right thing to do.
So from a safety perspective and from a layman's perspective, us sitting at home, us riding on the trains, when we hear that there's been a train collision, when we hear that people have died, our eyes shift and look at you as a regulator, and we want to say, how come you didn't prevent that? Are you ultimately responsible for the train accidents that we see, for the deaths that we see?
Actually, our act is very clear on whose responsibility safety belongs. It belongs to the operator. We oversee safety. We have an oversight responsibility as the regulator through the instruments that we have, issuing of a safety permit, but also making sure that every operator has what is called a safety management system, and we do assess the effectiveness and adequacy of the safety management system through what is called a common safety method for conformity assessments. That is a tool that we use to check the adequacy and effectiveness of that. And if we feel it's not adequate, it's not effective, and then we don't issue the permit.
So where you have issued a permit and an operator does something wrong, what is your enforcement package? What do you do to make sure that you hold them to book, or you bring them to book and hold them to account?
In terms of the Act, we have inspectors and they have powers in terms of Section 36 of our Act. Now, in Section 36, one of the tools that our inspectors use is what is called an improvement directive or a prohibition directives. These are directives that direct an operator to do or update or change something that is not correct. Now, a prohibition directive is where we stop trains. We stop trains on a particular line or section, and we've done that on some occasions. I mean, you would remember when we had the collision in Boysens, we actually stopped trains there on that line over that particular weekend until what we required had been rectified by the operator. So we do have those tools. Also, we do have a tool that we use where we issue penalties to an operator. There's a regulation that is in place where we issue penalties, and then those penalties can range up to 5 million rands that the operator must pay for a particular incident.
What's the biggest that you've ever levied?
On an operator?
Yeah.
We have levied about 3 million. That's the biggest we have levied. But also it's something that we take quite, there's a process about it on how you get to that stage, but we more predominantly use the tools that inspectors have of stopping trains or making sure that there's an improvement directive.
All right, we have to take a short break, but after the break, I want to ask Mr. Boya, what happens when an operator says, look, I'm just not going to do what you're saying I should do? Can they jail people? Can they do more than just fine and take away licenses? Let's find out after the break. Stay with us. Zero occurrences by the year 2020. That's the vision of the railway safety regulator, to try and keep you and I safe on the trains. But how are they going to do this? And what happens in the case of an operator like PRASA or Transnet or any of the other smaller operators that does not do what the regulator is recommending or issuing or instructing that they should do? That's the question that we are going to ask now Mr. Nkululeko Boya, who is the CEO of the RSR. So what do you do? If I say, as Transnet, as PRASA, look, I'm just not going to take you seriously.
The Act also gives us, in terms of Section 45, that we can lay criminal charges, and people can be jailed up to 15 years in prison for not adhering to, first of all, operating without a permit is a criminal offense. Not adhering to an instruction of an inspector is a criminal offense.
Okay.
So those are there within our Act to be able to use where it's particularly necessary.
All right. So you do have teeth as a regulator, because that's one of the criticisms leveled upon regulators, not just in South Africa, but across the world, that you are either one of two extremes. You are either too rigid, too stringent. You're like the police of the industry. There's no cooperation between you and industry. You are this person or this entity that is always cracking the whip. Or you are on the other side where you are too lax or nobody pays attention to what you have to say. Where would you place the RSR on that scale?
I think because of the maturity levels, and I think every action that we take as a regulator, we must take into cognizance the societal issues, the society within which that regulator operates. So as a regulator, we in South Africa, we're probably somewhere in between that scale. We do acknowledge that there are challenges within the railway system, but we do acknowledge as well that there are certain things that operators could do better. And therefore, we continue consistently speaking to them and requesting them to make sure that they improve in terms of safety-related performance of their business. Remember, safety is good business. So what we're trying to continue to say to them is safety is good business, and that's why in terms of the state of safety report, we have costs. We outline costs in terms of how much it costs for incidents on a particular financial year, and be able to encourage businesses, because there's direct cost and opportunity costs that they lose business as a result of their incidents that they actually go through.
We spoke earlier about what's going right, what's improving, and then you had mentioned that there are areas like train collisions which are not getting better. There are areas that are stubborn. What are you as a regulator doing to try and assist industry to deal with those areas?
If you take the issue of collisions as one example, we have, in terms of the new rolling stock, have implemented with the new rolling stock, particularly what is called collision avoidance technology, because there is no reason why trains should collide. There's technology in this day and age which allows us to be able to prevent collisions. But we do acknowledge that the current trains that we have in South Africa don't have that technology. But the new trains that are being put in place will definitely not collide, because we are putting technology in place, and as a regulator, we will not allow those trains on the line if they don't have the collision avoidance technologies.
But as much as technology is great, at the end of the day, there is an operator, a train operator, I would imagine, or somebody that is a human being operating this device. Now, you have in your report an element of human factors that you have highlighted, which is a big issue when it comes to safety on trains. Talk to us about that.
That is very correct, and that's why we talk about technology. Because if you look at the current Gautrain, Gautrain, you haven't heard of a collision.
No.
Not because mistakes are not being made by people, but because there's technology to prevent a collision. So, and that's really what we are impressing on the new trains that we're putting in place. Collision avoidance technology take away some of the functions from a person, so that when that person doesn't do what they're supposed to do, the technology, which is the train, comes in and then stops that particular person, and then we're able to find out what exactly had happened for that mistake to have taken place. 60% of our report occurrences are as a result of human factors. That's what we say on our report, which tells you already we should be focusing on human factors. And as a regulator, we have, in actual fact, over the past year or two, established our own human factors management department. We now have more than 11 inspectors which deal particularly and predominantly with human factors, and a human factor specialist is a very difficult person to find within the South African space, especially those that know rail.
But here's the thing though, that's a very tricky one, because if you're talking about increased reliance on technology, you might get into trouble with the unions who are going to say, you are now going to render our people redundant, because at the end of the day, if I have a job and my job is less and less to control and make sure the train gets to its destination safely, then I might as well not work. I might be replaced by this computer that you will import.
That is not really true. If you look, what we're trying to implement is nothing new for the aviation or the maritime industry. The aviation and maritime industry have actually moved quite far in those particular. I mean, you can put a plane on autopilot. It doesn't mean you don't need a pilot.
Okay.
So that's really what we're saying, is that the train must be able to travel so that when there is a problem and you do want to stop the train, you can when there's a problem with the driver. Let's make examples. The driver might have a heart attack. The driver might be chronic. Some of those things are some of the challenges that you have with drivers. And you need to assist the drivers so that they don't lose their own lives as well.
Okay.
And manage to create problems for the people that they're actually transporting at the same time.
So speaking of the correct trains, PRASA got into trouble recently because they got trains in that were not the right size, and there was a whole lot of, brouhaha around that. What are you as a regulator doing to ensure that that never happens again?
You know, we published a report on the 1st, it's on our website. It was published on the 1st of December 2015. And the report is very clear on exactly what our position is on the Afro 4000 trains. Without going into the detail of that particular report, before the Afro 4000, when they were brought into the country, we didn't have a regulation at that time to force operators to come to the regulator first. But on the 15th of September 2015, the minister signed a law into place, a regulation that makes it illegal for anyone to come and bring technologies in this country without the regulator having given an approval.
All right. We have to take a short break, but I want us to pick up on this point because this is a very important one. We are back after this short break. So before the break, we were talking to the CEO of the RSR, Mr. Nkululeko Boya, about what happened recently with PRASA, one of the operators that brought trains that were not the correct size. They were called the Afro 4000 trains, and there was a little bit of an issue with that. And now we want to know from him, as the CEO of the regulator, what they are doing to make sure that that kind of thing never happens again. So if you can just recap for us what you've done to date to prevent that.
Since the 15th of September, it is illegal for any operator to come into South Africa with technologies that are substandard or that have not been approved by the regulator. What would happen before is that it was by choice. A regulator, an operator will make a submission in terms of what you call our life cycle management, but it was not really something that we can enforce until we get to a stage of you submitting for your permit, where we can say, no, sorry, you can't allow that or not. At this stage, you can't bring and allow things in the South African system without a regulator having approved. And we've ramped up our capacity as well as a regulator so that we're able to give support to the operators so that we don't become a stumbling block in terms of them putting into production or what we call revenue service. They are technologies, because we still have to make sure that we process it and we assess that particular technologies that they've brought.
So we've spoken a lot about the operators, but do you play a role at all with the commuters? Because at the end of the day, it's not just the operators, it's also us who are getting on the trains. We spoke earlier about that statistic where, the safety element when it comes to the personal safety, people being stabbed or something like that on the trains is now on the increase. So what do you as a regulator do to try and get involved with us, the commuters?
Yes. One of the things that we have done, and this starting with the new trains. One of the things that we've requested on the new trains is that there are cameras on board the new trains.
Okay.
Because that then allows the law enforcement agencies, the security personnel, to be able to know what has happened in that particular train. Which means between station and station, we will then be able to be aware of what has happened, and that has been put in place on the new trains. Now, obviously, what we're doing now with the operator through their Gauteng Nerve Center, which is sitting in Kalfontein, is be able to make sure that there's live feed. Because we are saying, yes, it's great that you have visuals of what happens on board trains, but we need to get to a stage where we can have some live feed. But the live feed is available to the driver, and the driver can then communicate. Those are one of the things that we have done. But also what we have done at the moment, we're busy with the regulation, where we then request operators to be able to make sure that they look a lot more on the security plans. We focus on security plans when they submit for their permit, but also want to make sure that they have funded and they've got sufficient security personnel to make sure that people on board trains are safe and commuters are safe, and they can then travel with safety on board our trains.
But it is sometimes the very same commuters, when they are unhappy about something, we turn around and we burn the trains, or we vandalize the trains and all of that. Is that something the regulator is looking at?
Yes, it is something, one of the issues that we're looking at, and we can share this because it's also finding ways and means of how to protect the trains through technology. Technologies out there that allow that if you burn a train, you are able to then have particular technologies that might protect it from that.
How? Because if I put petrol and light a match, it's gone.
Yes, but you also, the certain material that burns easier than others.
Okay.
So what we're trying to say, knowing South African environment, let's find technologies that will be able to prevent such things. There was annually, every 2 years, there's what is called an InnoTrans. It happens in Germany every 2 years, where it's the biggest exhibition of railway equipment throughout the world. And most of the South African operators were there, and they've seen what we talk about. Technologies that can be put to prevent some of our challenges that we have. But still, I mean, we do encourage our operators, our commuters, to do the right thing and not ban due to frustration the same equipment that will take you to home and back to work every day. Because it is something that is not correct, and it is something that we need to all encourage our commuters and our people not to do that. We do understand their frustrations, and we're not going to sit here and say they're not because they are frustrated. But there are a lot of avenues on how we can vent out your particular frustrations. We do have, as a regulator, a call center. We have particular information. It's on our website. We do request people to complain when there's a problem.
Do they complain to you, or do they complain to the PRASA or the Transnet or whatever?
They can do both. For example, if the operators are not listening to them,
they can
come to us and say, we've raised these issues with we do encourage them to complain first with the operator, because it's not us. But if you're not getting any joy, you can come to the regulator so that we can then see if we can assist in your challenges that you actually have.
We've got to leave it there, and perhaps what we can do is to put up on our social media some of the numbers and contact details of the Railway Safety Regulator, so that those that would like to get in touch with you can do so. But thank you so much for talking to us, and all the best with keeping us safe on the trains. Thank you so much for making the time to join us here on Interface. We are back next week at the same time. Good night.